They said I was obsolete. They said what I built no longer mattered. They thought I'd leave quietly. But they forgot one thing. Without me, nothing runs. 25 years of my life poured into their empire. Every line of code, every sleepless night, every missed birthday, all erased in a boardroom meeting that lasted exactly 17 minutes. The CEO's mistress took my chair before it even had time to cool. They celebrated with champagne while I walked out with a cardboard box. They didn't know about the failsafe I'd buried deep in the system 15 years ago. They were about to learn. My name is Marissa Cole, and at 9:30 a.m., on a Tuesday that started like any other, I watched my entire world crumble in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking downtown Seattle. The mahogany table reflected 20 faces, board members I'd presented to hundreds of times, executives whose careers I'd salvaged during the 2008 crash, colleagues who'd once called me the backbone of Helixon Technologies. Now they all stared at their phones, their tablets, anything but me. "Marissa," Gavin Cross began, his voice carrying that manufactured authority he'd perfected since marrying into the founder's family 18 months ago. He didn't even look up from his notes. "We need to discuss your future at Helixon." I kept my hands steady on the table. 25 years of crisis management had taught me to read a room before it exploded. This one was already gone. "My future," I repeated, letting the words hang. "You mean the Sentinel Core network I designed, the system processing 7.8 billion in transactions as we speak, that future." Someone coughed. Board member Patricia Huang shifted in her seat, her Cartier bracelet clicking against the table. She'd sent me flowers when I pulled her division from bankruptcy in 2015. Now she studied her manicure like it held state secrets. Gavin finally met my eyes. 42 years old, Harvard MBA, and completely out of his depth, though he'd never admit it. The kind of man who confused arrogance with leadership, who thought a title made him untouchable. "The board has decided to pursue a more contemporary direction," he said. "Your methods, while admirable for their time, no longer align with our vision for innovation." Innovation, the word tasted like ash. This from a man who'd asked me 6 months ago what API stood for. "Contemporary," I echoed. "Is that what we're calling it?" Behind Gavin, she shifted Sabrina Lane, 28, blonde, Stanford dropout, who'd joined as his executive assistant 14 months ago, the same assistant who'd been leaving his office at odd hours, whose LinkedIn suddenly listed skills in strategic systems architecture, despite never writing a line of code in her life. "We appreciate everything you've done," Gavin continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Your severance package is generous. 3 months, full benefits, and we won't contest unemployment." 3 months, for 25 years. I opened the folder, scanning the termination agreement. "Effective immediately. Clean out your office by noon. Sign the non-disclosure agreement. Surrender all access codes." "Who's taking over the Sentinel Core network?" I asked, though I already knew. "Sabrina will be stepping into the role of Chief Innovation Officer," Gavin announced, and she had the audacity to smile. "She's been shadowing your work, learning the systems. We're confident in a smooth transition." Shadowing. Is that what they called those late-night strategy sessions in his office? I stood slowly, gathering my things with deliberate calm. Every instinct screamed to fight. To remind them of the nights I'd spent building their empire from 8 people in a converted warehouse to a global powerhouse. The marriages I'd sacrificed. The daughter who barely knew me. My father's funeral I'd missed because of a server crisis only I could fix. But I didn't. Because in that moment, watching Gavin's smug satisfaction and Sabrina's triumphant smirk, I remembered something they'd all forgotten. The Sentinel Core network wasn't just code and servers. It was my creation. Every line written with my hands. Every protocol designed with safeguards only I understood, including one particular safeguard I'd embedded 15 years ago. So deep in the architecture that no audit had ever found it. A dead man's switch, coded to recognize only my biometric signature for critical operations. They thought they were replacing me. They had no idea they'd just armed the bomb. "I'll clean out my office," I said, my voice steady as granite. "I assume security will escort me." "That won't be necessary," Gavin said, already dismissing me from his attention. We trust you'll handle this professionally. Trust. From a man who'd built his career on stealing others' work. I walked to the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that had echoed through these halls for decades. At the threshold, I turned back once. 20 faces, still avoiding my gaze, except Gavin, whose eyes held that particular brand of corporate cruelty, the kind that destroys lives over quarterly reports. "Marissa," he called out, as if remembering something. "The system passwords. It will need them by end of day." "Of course," I replied. "I'll send everything you need." And I would. Every password, every access code, every key to the kingdom. Everything except the one thing that actually mattered, the knowledge that in exactly 72 hours, when the next wave of international contracts required executive-level authentication, the Sentinel Core network would start looking for my biometric signature. And when it didn't find me, Helixon Technologies would learn what 25 years of loyalty was really worth. The cardboard box sat on my kitchen counter like a monument to erasure, a coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" that my daughter Emma had given me, ironic, considering how many of her recitals I'd missed, a stress ball from the 2012 leadership retreat, a photo from the company's 10th anniversary, 8 of us grinning outside that converted warehouse in Bellevue, back when we believed we were changing the world. 25 years. The number kept cycling through my mind as I stared at the Seattle skyline from my Capitol Hill apartment. 25 years since I'd walked into that warehouse at 20, fresh from MIT, eager to prove that a woman could code circles around anyone. Back then, Helixon was just a dream and 8 people crazy enough to chase it. I'd written the first version of Sentinel Core Network on a second-hand laptop, sitting on milk crates because we couldn't afford proper furniture. David Huang, the founder, had promised us equity instead of competitive salaries. "We're building something revolutionary," he'd said. "Trust the process." So I trusted. Through 60-hour weeks that became 80-hour weeks. Through the first crash when we almost folded. Through the pivot from consumer software to enterprise solutions that saved us. I built the authentication protocols that became our signature. The security architecture that Fortune 500 companies paid millions to implement. The logistics coordination system that made us indispensable to global supply chains. My phone buzzed. Emma, texting from her dorm at Berkeley. "Mom, saw the news about Helixon restructuring. You okay?" Restructuring, that's what they were calling it. I texted back that I was fine. That it was time for a change anyway. The lies parents tell to protect their children. Another buzz. My ex-husband Marcus. "Marissa, just heard. Those bastards. You need anything?" I almost laughed. Marcus had begged me to quit for years. Said the company was eating me alive. The divorce papers were filed the same week I made senior vice president. He'd remarried 2 years later. Had the family life I'd traded for stock options and board meetings. But it was the third message that stopped me cold. From David Huang himself. Retired in Hawaii since his son-in-law Gavin took over. "I'm sorry. I fought it when I heard. The board wouldn't listen. You deserved better." Deserved. Past tense. As if I was already history. I opened my laptop. Not the company one I'd surrendered, but my personal machine. The one where I'd kept copies of everything. Legal, probably not. But when you build something from nothing, some part of it always remains yours. The original Sentinel Core Network specifications filled my screen. Line after line of code I'd written. Refined. Perfected. Most people saw code as logic, cold and impersonal. I saw poetry. Each function was a stanza. Each protocol a verse in an epic that had consumed half my life. And there, buried in the authentication module, was my insurance policy. I'd written it after the 2010 breach, when a competitor had tried to poach our entire engineering team. The board had panicked about insider threats, demanded fail-safes, so I gave them a biometric authentication requirement for any transaction over $1 billion, any contract modification affecting more than 10% of revenue, any security override of critical systems. What I hadn't told them was that the biometric signature was hard-coded to recognize only the system's original architect, me. Not even admin access could override it because I'd woven it into the kernel itself. It was like DNA, you couldn't remove it without killing the organism. For 15 years, It had lain dormant. I'd authenticated every major transaction without anyone realizing the system required my specific biometric signature, my fingerprint on the scanner, my retina in the camera. Even my typing patterns. Sentinel knew me like a child knows its mother. Gavin had no idea. The board had no idea. Sabrina, with her fabricated resume and borrowed expertise, definitely had no idea. In approximately 70 hours, when the Singapore semiconductor contracts came up for quarterly renewal, $7.8 billion in automated transactions, Sentinel would look for me. And I wouldn't be there. I closed the laptop and walked to my window. The Helixon Tower gleamed in the distance. 40 stories of glass and steel built on code I'd written in a warehouse. Somewhere up there, Gavin was probably celebrating. Sabrina was probably moving into my office, and the board was probably congratulating themselves on cutting dead weight. My reflection stared back from the dark window 45 years old, silver streaking through brown hair I'd stopped dyeing years ago. Lines earned from decades of fighting fires no one else could put out. They'd erased me from the company history, but they couldn't erase me from the code. The wine tasted better with each sip. 25 years of sacrifice, and they'd thrown me away for a younger model who couldn't tell Python from JavaScript. But I'd taught Sentinel to be loyal. And in 70 hours, they'd learned that some things can't be replaced. The old laptop hummed on my dining table, its screen casting blue shadows across scattered papers, the original Sentinel Core network documentation. Handwritten notes from 2009 flowcharts I'd sketched on napkins during late-night coding sessions. Most people would see chaos. I saw the DNA of an empire. At 2:15 a.m., sleepless and wired on my third cup of coffee, I found what I'd been looking for. The emergency protocol, buried in section 47C of the authentication module. I'd named it Project Lazarus, in the comments a private joke about systems that could resurrect themselves or destroy themselves, depending on your perspective. The code was elegant in its simplicity. If primary architect biometric signature is absent for 72 consecutive hours during critical transaction period lockdown mode equals true. If override attempted without proper authorization, cascade failure equals initiate. If force bypass detected, full system as encryption execute. I'd written it during a particularly dark period in 2010. My marriage was crumbling. The company was facing hostile takeover attempts, and I just learned that several board members were secretly negotiating to sell our technology to a competitor. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. So I'd given Sentinel something more than intelligence, I'd given it loyalty. Not to the company, not to the board, but to the architect who'd birthed it from nothing. Me. The protocol was invisible during normal operations. As long as I was there, authenticating transactions with my biometric signature, Sentinel hummed along perfectly. But remove me from the equation, and the system would start asking questions. Where is the architect? Why is she gone? Who's trying to force access without her? It was more than a failsafe, it was a digital immune system, designed to reject foreign bodies. My phone rang, startling me from my code review. 3:27. Who would? Marissa. The voice was familiar but unexpected. James Morrison, Helixon's chief technology officer, and one of the few people who might actually understand what I'd built. James, bit late for a social call. A pause. I'm in the server room. Something's odd. The system's running perfectly, but there are these underlying patterns in the architecture I've never noticed before, almost like it's waiting for something. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. You're probably just seeing normal maintenance protocols. Sentinel runs thousands of background processes. Maybe, he sounded unconvinced. Marissa, what they did to you was wrong. Everyone knows it. Gavin's an idiot. And Sabrina, she asked me yesterday what a kernel was. This is insane. It's done, James. Is it? His voice dropped lower. Because I'm looking at authentication logs, and your biometric signature is embedded everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It's like the system is built around your DNA. How do we? You'll figure it out, I interrupted. Sabrina's the chief innovation officer now. I'm sure she has innovative solutions. Silence. Then Marissa, what did you do? I built a system exactly as specified, secure, robust, with multiple fail-safes against unauthorized access. Unauthorized access, he repeated slowly. And who determines authorization? The system does, based on parameters established at inception. Another long pause. I could practically hear him thinking, running through the implications. The Singapore contracts renew in 69 hours, he said finally. 7.8 billion in automated transactions. I'm aware. Marissa. Good night, James. I hung up and turned back to the laptop. James was smart, probably the only person at Helixon who could potentially understand Project Lazarus. But understanding and defeating it were two different things. The beauty of the protocol was its integration. I hadn't just added it to Sentinel, I'd woven it into the fundamental architecture. Every security certificate, every encryption key, every authentication token carried a piece of it. It was like trying to remove your skeleton while keeping your body intact. I pulled up another file, the email I'd written but never sent, dated 3 years ago when Gavin first arrived. In it, I detailed the emergency protocol, explaining its purpose and how to properly transfer architect credentials. I'd meant to send it to David Huang, to ensure continuity if something happened to me. But then I'd watched Gavin take credit for my work in his first board presentation, watched him promote his drinking buddies over qualified engineers, watched him start his affair with Sabrina while his wife David's daughter was undergoing chemotherapy. I'd deleted the email, let him figure it out himself. Now, staring at the code that had consumed decades of my life, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. They'd called me obsolete, a relic, dead weight. In 69 hours, they'd learned that some relics were load-bearing walls. Some dead weight was actually the anchor keeping the ship from drifting into the rocks. And sometimes, what looks obsolete is actually just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone why it was essential in the first place. I closed the laptop and went to bed. For the first time in 25 years, I didn't set an alarm. Sentinel would wake me when it was time. Day one started with my phone buzzing at 6:43 a.m. Not a call, news alerts. Bloomberg, Helixon Technologies reports minor delays in Singapore semiconductor shipment. Reuters, technical glitch holds up 1.2B. Chip order at port. I smiled into my coffee. Minor delays, technical glitch. The Singapore contracts were the first dominoes, every quarter, like clockwork. Sentinel processed the semiconductor orders automated, seamless, invisible, the kind of transaction that executives never thought about because it just worked. Until it didn't. By noon, my phone was a symphony of notifications. I'd turned off calls, but the texts kept coming. Former colleagues, industry contacts, even competitors fishing for information. I ignored them all except one from Lin Zhao, our Singapore operations director. System rejecting all authentication attempts. Need your override codes ASAP. I deleted it without responding. There were no override codes. That was the point. The afternoon brought escalation. CNBC ran a segment on supply chain disruptions in tech sector. They showed footage of shipping containers stacked at Singapore's port, waiting for clearance that wouldn't come. Gavin appeared via satellite, all confident smiles and empty reassurances. This is a routine system update, he said, that Harvard MBA polish on full display. Our new Chief Innovation Officer is implementing cutting-edge improvements. These minor delays are actually signs of progress. The reporter pressed, sources indicate the delays could cost millions per day. How is that progress? Gavin's smile tightened. Short-term adjustments for long-term gains. Helixon has never been stronger. Behind him, barely visible in the frame, I caught a glimpse of Sabrina. She looked pale, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing frantically at someone off camera. By evening, the story had evolved. The Wall Street Journal posted an article, Inside Helixon's Shipping Crisis When Automation Fails. They'd found 3 unnamed sources confirming that the authentication system was rejecting all attempts to process the Singapore contracts. The system keeps requesting someone called the primary architect, one source stated. Nobody knows what that means. I knew. Sentinel knew. At 9:17 p.m., James Morrison called again. I let it go to voicemail. Marissa, please, the system is locked tighter than Fort Knox. Every workaround triggers deeper encryption. Sabrina tried to force a manual override and crashed 3 servers. The board is starting to panic. Just call me back. Day 2 dawned with Helix's stock down 4% in pre-market trading. The Singapore situation had metastasized. The authentication failures were spreading to other systems' logistics, inventory, even some accounting functions. Anything that required high-level clearance was hitting the same wall primary architect authorization required. I watched from my couch as Gavin held an emergency press conference at 10 a.m. "We're experiencing what our tech team calls a security feature," he announced, reading from cards someone had clearly just handed him. "Our systems are so sophisticated, so secure, that they're actually protecting against potential threats we haven't even identified yet." A reporter shouted, "Is it true you fired your chief systems architect 3 days ago?" Gavin's composure cracked for just a second. Personnel changes are unrelated to these technical matters. But wasn't Marissa Cole the original designer of these systems? Ms. Cole's contributions were significant in the past, but Helix's technology has evolved far beyond any single individual's work. I actually laughed out loud. Evolved beyond. He had no idea that evolution required the original DNA. The afternoon brought more dominoes. Reuters reported that 6 major clients were requesting emergency meetings. 2 government contracts were under review. The Singapore Semiconductor Company was threatening to find alternative logistics partners. Then came the leak someone sent TechCrunch internal emails showing Sabrina frantically Googling authentication protocol override and what is biometric architecture. The headline wrote itself, "Chief Innovation Officer Googles how to do her job as 7.8B burns." By 6 p.m., Helix's stock had dropped 11% from Monday's close. My phone rang again, this time, a number I recognized, Patricia Huang from the board. "Marissa. Dear," she began, her voice sugary with desperation. "There seems to be some confusion about the transition. Would you consider a consulting arrangement just to smooth things over?" "Patricia, you sat there while Gavin called me obsolete." "That was unfortunate phrasing. You know how men can be." "I do. That's why I planned for it." Silence. "Then what do you want?" "Nothing. I wanted 25 more years of building something remarkable. That ship has sailed." "Marissa, be reasonable." I hung up. The evening news led with Helixon. They'd found footage of the Singapore port, hundreds of containers bearing the Helixon logo, stranded like beached whales. The estimated daily loss had climbed to 32 million. At 11:43 p.m., a text from an unknown number. "This is Gavin. We need to talk. Name your price." I turned off my phone and went to bed. Day 3 would be even better. The empire I'd built was learning what happened when you removed its architect. Every line of code I'd written was calling for its creator, and finding only silence. Let them call it a glitch. I called it loyalty. Day 1 started with my phone buzzing at 6:43 a.m. Not a call, news alerts. Bloomberg, Helixon Technologies reports minor delays in Singapore semiconductor shipment. Reuters, technical glitch holds up 1.2B. Chip order at port. I smiled into my coffee. Minor delays, technical glitch. The Singapore contracts were the first dominoes, every quarter, like clockwork. Sentinel processed the semiconductor orders automated, seamless, invisible. The kind of transaction that executives never thought about because it just worked. Until it didn't. By noon, my phone was a symphony of notifications. I turned off calls. But the texts kept coming. Former colleagues, industry contacts, even competitors fishing for information. I ignored them all except one from Lin Zhao, our Singapore operations director. "System rejecting all authentication attempts. Need your override codes ASAP." I deleted it without responding. There were no override codes. That was the point. The afternoon brought escalation. CNBC ran a segment on supply chain disruptions in tech sector. They showed footage of shipping containers stacked at Singapore's port, waiting for clearance that wouldn't come. Gavin appeared via satellite, all confident smiles and empty reassurances. "This is a routine system update," he said, that Harvard MBA polish on full display. "Our new Chief Innovation Officer is implementing cutting-edge improvements. These minor delays are actually signs of progress. The reporter pressed, "Sources indicate the delays could cost millions per day. How is that progress?" Gavin's smile tightened. "Short-term adjustments for long-term gains. Helixon has never been stronger." Behind him, barely visible in the frame, I caught a glimpse of Sabrina. She looked pale, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing frantically at someone off camera. By evening, the story had evolved. The Wall Street Journal posted an article, "Inside Helixon's shipping crisis when automation fails." They'd found 3 unnamed sources confirming that the authentication system was rejecting all attempts to process the Singapore contracts. "The system keeps requesting someone called the primary architect," one source stated. "Nobody knows what that means." I knew. Sentinel knew. At 9:17 p.m., James Morrison called again. I let it go to voicemail. "Marissa, please. The system is locked tighter than Fort Knox. Every workaround triggers deeper encryption. Sabrina tried to force a manual override and crashed 3 servers. The board is starting to panic. Just call me back." Day 2 dawned with Helixon's stock down 4% in pre-market trading. The Singapore situation had metastasized. The authentication failures were spreading to other systems, logistics, inventory, even some accounting functions. Anything that required high-level clearance was hitting the same wall primary architect authorization required. I watched from my couch as Gavin held an emergency press conference at 10 a.m. "We're experiencing what our tech team calls a security feature," he announced, reading from cards someone had clearly just handed him. "Our systems are so sophisticated, so secure, that they're actually protecting against potential threats we haven't even identified yet." A reporter shouted, "Is it true you fired your chief systems architect 3 days ago?" Gavin's composure cracked for just a second. Personnel changes are unrelated to these technical matters. But wasn't Marissa Cole the original designer of these systems? Ms. Cole's contributions were significant in the past, but Helixon's technology has evolved far beyond any single individual's work. I actually laughed out loud. Evolved beyond. He had no idea that evolution required the original DNA. The afternoon brought more dominoes. Reuters reported that 6 major clients were requesting emergency meetings. 2 government contracts were under review. The Singapore Semiconductor Company was threatening to find alternative logistics partners. Then came the leak someone sent TechCrunch internal emails showing Sabrina frantically Googling authentication protocol override and what is biometric architecture. The headline wrote itself, "Chief Innovation Officer Googles how to do her job as 7.8B burns." By 6 p.m., Helixon's stock had dropped 11% from Monday's close. My phone rang again, this time, a number I recognized, Patricia Huang from the board. "Marissa, dear," she began, her voice sugary with desperation. "There seems to be some confusion about the transition. Would you consider a consulting arrangement just to smooth things over?" "Patricia, you sat there while Gavin called me obsolete." "That was unfortunate phrasing. You know how men can be." "I do. That's why I planned for it." Silence. "Then what do you want?" "Nothing. I wanted 25 more years of building something remarkable. That ship has sailed." "Marissa, be reasonable." I hung up. The evening news led with Helixon. They'd found footage of the Singapore port, hundreds of containers bearing the Helixon logo, stranded like beached whales. The estimated daily loss had climbed to 32 million. At 11:43 p.m., a text from an unknown number. "This is Gavin. We need to talk. Name your price." I turned off my phone and went to bed. Day 3 would be even better. The empire I'd built was learning what happened when you removed its architect. Every line of code I'd written was calling for its creator, and finding only silence. Let them call it a glitch. I called it loyalty. Day 3 arrived with the subtlety of a tsunami. I woke at 5:12 a.m., to my laptop pinging not my phone, but automated alerts I'd set up years ago to monitor Sentinel's health. The system wasn't sick. It was doing exactly what I'd programmed it to do. But the alerts showed something beautiful, 8,437 failed authentication attempts in the last 12 hours. They were trying everything. Brute force attacks, SQL injections, back-end bypasses, Each attempt triggered Sentinel's immune response, adding another layer of encryption, another locked door. By 6 a.m., the financial markets were in freefall. Helixon opened down 23%. Nasdaq halted trading twice before breakfast. The news was everywhere. CNN ran a split screen the Singapore port on one side, Helixon's plummeting stock ticker on the other. The headline, "Tech Giant Paralyzed as Systems Reject All Access." Then came the leaked email that changed everything. Someone, probably a disgruntled employee watching their stock options evaporate, sent The Washington Post an internal message from 3 months ago. In it, James Morrison had warned Gavin explicitly, removing Marissa Cole would be catastrophic. She's integrated into the system architecture at a fundamental level. This isn't about personnel, it's about infrastructure. Gavin's response, preserved forever in corporate stupidity. I don't care if she built it. Anyone can be replaced. Make it happen. The Post ran it under the headline, CEO ignored warnings before 7.8B meltdown. By noon, the situation had gone global. The BBC, Le Monde, Nikkei, everyone was covering the story of the American tech giant brought to its knees by its own security system. Someone leaked footage from inside Helixon headquarters, engineers sleeping under desks, pizza boxes stacked like monuments to futility, and in one telling frame, Sabrina Lane crying in what used to be my office. The meme started around 2 p.m. My favorite, Gavin's face photoshopped onto the Titanic captain with the caption, "Anyone can be replaced." Twitter made #Sentinel knows trend worldwide. At 3:47 p.m., the board held an emergency meeting. Someone live-streamed it, probably illegal. Definitely satisfying. Gavin sat at the head of the table, but the power had already shifted. Board members who'd avoided my eyes a week ago were now screaming at him. 60% of our contracts require executive authentication by end of week, someone shouted. That's $14 billion frozen. The Department of Defense is reviewing our security clearance, another added. If we lose that, we're finished. Patricia Huang's voice cut through the chaos. Where's Sabrina? Why isn't your chief innovation officer fixing this? The camera caught Gavin's face, a masterclass in defeat disguised as defiance. She's exploring solutions. She's Googling solutions, someone corrected. My assistant saw her searching how to decrypt without encryption key. Nervous laughter rippled through the room, the kind that comes before executions. Then David Huang spoke via video link from Hawaii. The founder's voice still carried weight. Has anyone actually talked to Marissa? Silence. You fired the architect of our entire infrastructure, he continued. Replaced her with your mistress, and now you're surprised the building is collapsing. That's an oversimplification, Gavin started. It's really not, David interrupted. I've been reviewing the code. Marissa didn't just build Sentinel, she is Sentinel. Her biometric signature is woven into every critical function. It would be easier to build a new system from scratch than to remove her from this one. More silence. Then, barely audible, how long would that take? 2 years, minimum, if we had someone of Marissa's caliber, which we don't, because you fired her. The feed cut off, but the damage was done. Within an hour, Gavin's fault was trending above #Sentinel knows. At 7:23 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw James Morrison holding a bottle of wine and looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. I let him in. Chateau Margaux 2010, he said, holding up the bottle. Figured if we're watching the apocalypse, might as well have good wine. We sat on my balcony, Seattle spreading below us. The Helixon Tower, visible in the distance, lit up like a beacon of corporate disaster. 60% down at market close, James said, pouring generous glasses. The board's calling for Gavin's head. Sabrina disappeared, rumor is she's already lawyered up. And Sentinel. He laughed, dark and appreciative. Sentinel is perfect, absolutely perfect. It's doing exactly what you designed it to do, protect the system from unauthorized access. We drank in silence for a moment. They'll come for you, he said finally. The board, the lawyers, maybe the FBI if this gets classified as sabotage. It's not sabotage. I left the system exactly as I built it. They removed the one person authorized to run it. That's not my fault. You knew this would happen. I took another sip. I suspected removing the primary architect from a biometric authenticated system might cause issues. Yes. James shook his head, but he was smiling. 25 years, and they threw you away for a blonde who can't code. They threw away a lot of people over the years. I just happened to leave a reminder of why that's a bad idea. As we watched, another light went off in the Helixon Tower. Then another. The Empire was eating itself alive, department by department, function by function. You know what the irony is, James said. If they'd just let you retire properly, transitioned your credentials over 6 months like you'd proposed last year, none of this would have happened. But then Gavin wouldn't have gotten to prove he was in charge. How's that working out for him? We clinked glasses as the news alert popped up on my phone. Helixon board calls emergency shareholder meeting to discuss CEO removal. The architect was gone, but her architecture remained. And it was loyal to the very end. Gavin's counterattack began at 6 a.m. on day 4 with a CNN exclusive interview. He looked haggard but determined. His usual polish replaced with calculated vulnerability wrinkled shirt, stubble. The image of a leader under siege. The set was deliberately sparse, projecting crisis management rather than corporate luxury. This is corporate sabotage, he declared, looking directly into the camera. Marissa Cole embedded malicious code designed to trigger if she was ever held accountable for her performance. The anchor pressed, "Are you suggesting she planned this?" "I'm not suggesting, I'm stating. We have evidence that unauthorized modifications were made to our systems years ago. Hidden tripwires, designed to hold the company hostage." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. He was really going there. "We've contacted federal authorities," Gavin continued. "The FBI's cybercrime division is investigating. This isn't just about Helixon, it's about preventing extortion through technological terrorism." Within an hour, his narrative was everywhere. Fox Business ran with, "Disgruntled employees' revenge costs billions." The Wall Street Journal published an op-ed, "When coders think they're God." By 8:30 a.m., 2 FBI agents were at my door. "Ms. Cole, we need to ask you some questions." Agent Sarah Kim was all business. Her partner, Agent Rodriguez, seemed more sympathetic. They sat in my living room, reviewing documents on a tablet. "Did you embed any unauthorized code in Helixon's systems?" Kim asked. "Every line of code I wrote was authorized. I was chief systems architect. Code specifically designed to trigger upon your termination. I designed security features to prevent unauthorized access. That was my job." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Ms. Cole, help us understand. What exactly is preventing Helixon from accessing their own systems?" I pulled out my personal laptop, showing them the original specifications. In 2010, the board demanded fail-safes against insider threats. They were paranoid about corporate espionage, especially after several employees were poached by competitors. I showed them the approval emails, the board resolutions, even David Huang's personal commendation for my innovative security architecture. The biometric authentication protocol was approved at the highest levels, I continued. It requires the system architect's signature for critical operations. That's not sabotage, that's security working as designed. Kim frowned. "But you made yourself irreplaceable." "I made the system secure. They made me irreplaceable when they failed to properly transition my credentials." "You could have warned them," Rodriguez suggested. I pulled up another email, dated 6 months ago. I proposed a transition plan. 6 months to properly transfer architect credentials, train a successor, ensure continuity. Gavin rejected it as unnecessary bureaucracy. The agents exchanged glances. Meanwhile, Gavin's media blitz intensified. He appeared on 3 more shows by noon, each time escalating his rhetoric. Corporate terrorist, digital hostage-taking, an attack on American innovation. But while he was performing for cameras, Sentinel was performing its own show. At 1:15 p.m., the system flagged something interesting in Helixon's internal communications, a pattern of irregular transactions dating back 18 months, all authorized by Gavin himself. small amounts, but consistent, routed through shell companies to accounts in the Caymans. Sentinel didn't judge, it just recorded, analyzed, and when its security protocols were triggered, reported. The automated compliance report went to the